You there, Denise?
Yeah,
Yeah. Can I make you a host and just help me with letting people in?
yeah, but there's only two people. Oh, there's more. Okay.
Yeah, Denise? Yeah, okay, hold on a second. Can I make, all right, there we go. Okay. Yeah, there's people there, but not now. Don't let them in now.
Okay, what do I do again?
Well, basically, you can look at the participants menu, and when they come in, just admit them, or it will usually pop up on your screen and say there's people in the waiting room, and just go ahead and hit the admit click button when you see that.
Do I do admit all?
Not right. Well, when we're ready to start here,
Right, admit all.
yeah, you can hit admit all anytime, and that will let anybody that's in the waiting room in.
Yeah.
Let's see. Let's start recording this. Okay, great. So it looks like it's around 2 o'clock. We have 13 people. How you doing?
You're recording, so I don't want to talk.
Oh, okay, all right. And we're also live on Facebook right now too. So do you want to practice? Do you want to hit admit all
Mm.
in the participants menu? I can do it if you want.
Oh, hold on. You can do it. Okay, I'm
Okay,
gonna do it right now.
okay. There we go. Okay, so
Can anybody hear me?
yeah, I can hear you, Jeffrey. So we're letting people in now, so everybody.
I can't hear you.
You can't hear me?
Hold up. Why does it keep doing that?
Hey, Eric.
Now can you hear me?
I can still hear you. Yes, I can hear you.
Well, I couldn't because my sub volume is set to wrong.
Okay.
Is this the meeting that my mother wanted me to, you wanted my mother to attend?
Well, your mother's certainly welcome to attend. You know, I always want everybody to attend. So, if your mother wants to sit in, that would be great.
Yeah, she did. Yeah, she doesn't want it to come. She's in meetings her whole life.
Yeah, that's okay. That's perfectly fine. Thank you, Jeffrey.
Welcome.
Yeah, so, we're gonna wait and let a few people in here.
Just for the record, I do have a processing disorder, so can you talk in a way that's easy for me to understand?
I can do my best, Jeffrey. I already have, sort of, what I'm gonna say lined up, and hopefully you'll be able to understand what I'm saying.
Hopefully.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to do a presentation for the first part of it and show a couple videos. So Jeffrey, if you can mute yourself, and that way we will have a clean recording. Okay. There we go. All right. Oh, it looks like we've got a lot of people in. Let me all right. So this show's going to be recorded, is being recorded. It's live on YouTube right now. And so I just want to keep in mind, when we come to the question and answer, if you want, you can turn on your video. That would be great, so that we can have a picture of your video, of you on video. Still letting people in here. So, but just so you're aware that it's going to be also reproduced and disseminated on YouTube in both video and audio format. So just to keep you informed on that, you're welcome to keep your cameras on, or you can turn them off if you like. But when we come to the question and answer, if you could turn them on if you want, we'd love to see your beautiful face. Let's see. Okay. So looks like we may be ready to start. Okay, so let me get. So I'm going to do a presentation, show a couple videos, and lead a discussion. But the first, what I want to do is to tell you a little bit about the Truth and Democracy Coalition, and then about some of our upcoming events. So the Truth and Democracy Coalition was formed to build a pro-democracy movement in America. We educate the public about disinformation, teach people to be critical of the propaganda they consume, provide critical analysis of current events and social issues. We produce media and educational materials, hold seminars and meetings, work with other organizations, and organize events and activities geared towards building a pro-democracy movement in America. The coalition seeks to build communities of people of different faiths and ideologies to defend and promote democracy locally, nationally, and globally. And there's one thing I want to do here. I want to spotlight myself. There you go. All right. So on July 2nd at 2 p.m. Pacific time, we will have our second nonpartisan Red Pills men's group. And so what we do at that group is we talk about women, relationships, politics, and life. And at our second meeting, we're going to begin our book study of the book, The Rational Male by Rollo Tomassi. And we will begin with the first section of the book, The Basics. So to register, go to tinyurl.com/redpillmen. And then on July 16th, 2023 here at 2 p.m., we will have the first of a series of planning committee meetings for our January 6th remembrance event. We are planning our annual event to remember the attempted coup and insurrection against the United States Congress. It's important to remember what happened and not let the horrendous actions of then President Donald Trump and his extremist followers work to overthrow our government and install Donald Trump as dictator for life. So we must keep, in order to resist authoritarianism in America, we have to keep the events of January 6, 2021 at the forefront of people's minds as we head into the 2024 elections with Donald Trump still the front runner for the Republican nomination. So we're going to be organizing an event in Whittier, and we will help others organize events in their hometowns. So join us on July 16th at 2 p.m. by registering at tinyurl.com/Jan62024. And then finally, be sure to check out our YouTube page at youtube.com/@Truth and Democracy Coalition. And be sure to like, share, and subscribe. And I'm going to right now put all of these links and some in the chat for you.
I was just about to ask if you could do that for us.
Thank you, Jeffrey. So
Oh, and as for the 2024 election, I think there's some good news. Can I at least say it?
well, I'm trying to get through this event, Jeffrey.
Really-
Really briefly, what's the good
All right.
news?
If Donald Trump and Ron DeSantis go at each other, this could potentially split the GOP in half.
Well, we can only hope. Thank you, Jeffrey.
And that plus
That's
with
okay.
the new contract they're trying to get signed, this may convert more GOPs to the Democratic side. I'm
Well,
trying to share that around.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Jeffrey. I'm going to mute you now. All right. So let's get back to the show here. Okay. Okay. So I'm going to lead a discussion about what's wrong with men and what to do about it. As a survivor of severe sexual abuse, I'm going to tell my story, address the problems facing men today, and talk about what we need to do to help men. So in this type of discussion, it's difficult to draw a line on what one should and shouldn't say. And a number of the issues are difficult to talk about. I don't want to name names or identify people, and I'm certainly not telling you everything. I'm only going to talk about things that are relevant to our discussion about men's loneliness and despair. I will try to find the right balance, and I beg your patience with me and with one another as we grapple with this difficult subject. Now, the reason I believe the abuse began very early in my life was because one night, my first sleepover, I began doing something to the boy. I was emulating, I think, what had been done to me, and I had really no sexual feelings about it at all. And I don't really remember what came of it, but I know that my parents concocted a pseudonym for the little boy because every time he saw us, he had a terrible look on his face. At about 4 or 5 years old, a 16-year-old girl took me into the bedroom and flashed me. I didn't have any sexual feelings. I remember thinking, and maybe even saying, what do you want me to do? Drink milk? It was like a strip club and a bachelorette party when she flashed me, went down on me, and even sat on me. To this day, I don't like strip clubs or bachelor parties, and I'm particularly opposed to what goes on at bachelorette parties. I don't like burlesque shows or belly dancing, places like Mardi Gras and boat parties and spring breaks where women expose themselves, trigger painful feelings from the abuse. I once broke up with a woman because she went to a bachelorette party and tried to make me go to a bachelor party, even after I told her I didn't want to, and that it would end our relationship, not because I forbid it, but because I simply couldn't be with her afterwards. And I would do that again should the same thing happen. Obviously, this has caused me a great deal of difficulty, but there's more. So this same type of abuse went on seasonally until I hit puberty, and it introduced me to sexual behavior as a young child. As a result, I ended up seeking out sexual activity. I kissed a girl in 2nd grade and made her cry. I had a relationship with a friend starting in the 4th grade that lasted into our teenage years and early adulthood. Not only did I seek out relationships with my peers, I sought out sexual activities with babysitters and other adults, both female and male. When I was around 11 or 12, I ran into one of those babysitters walking down the street with another man. There was this cave in the hillside where we as kids would go and play. And so we went into that cave, and that's where that other man raped me, basically. So he wanted to kill me and bury me in that cave, but the babysitter said no. And that babysitter came back later on as part of some 12-step program to apologize, to try and make amends. And the others that were there wanted to kill him, but I thanked him for saving my life that day. Now, I was 6 feet tall by the 6th grade. I soon attracted the interest of another woman. I and the others were staying with her husband, and her children. When it came to the end of the evening, she placed the other boys in another room and gave me the room with the waterbed in it. Now, back in the 70s, water beds were all the rage. I mean, particularly after the sexual revolution. They fell out of favor, however, because they tended to leak. In fact, I remember the bed sprung a bad leak, and I watched her fix that leak like a pro, effectively, efficiently. I was impressed. She had obviously done this before, and I recognized how unsexy she looked, fixing the leak in the nude. Now, I didn't know why she was giving me the room with the waterbed. I assumed that there wasn't enough room where the others were sleeping. And of course, later in the evening, she came in and seduced me. Now, this is where I want to talk about what grooming is. It's not like a cat grooms itself or how I groom my beard. Grooming, when it comes to sexual abuse, is the seduction of a child. It's simple. It's that simple. Now, she kept me up most of the night, and in the morning, I had to engage in activities with the other kids and her husband. The next day, I was sleepy. By the third, I was so tired, I simply fell asleep as she attempted to seduce me. She was pissed. I couldn't keep my eyes open. I couldn't perform. I couldn't continue to be out all night and have sex I'd be out all day and have sex all night and be able to function. So she came up with a solution. I needed to be excused from the daytime activities because I was tired and needed to sleep. I didn't know if it took 1 or 2 days in a row for her husband out entertaining the children to start thinking, why is he tired? Why does he need to get more sleep? He must have then realized what was happening, turned the car around and sped home in the afternoon to catch his wife hopping on me on the waterbed. Later that evening, he was angry. He was a burly man. He was a sportsman. He started to ask me why I did what I did and if I knew it was wrong. And I got scared and I started to cry. I was afraid he was going to beat me up. When he saw that, he threw himself to me, wrapped his arms around me, and hugged me. I didn't make the decision, I told him. He asked, sort of using gestures and words, why I had an erection. She does that. I don't know. I was confused. They divorced not long after that. Now, many young girls and boys who have been groomed and abused are also confused. Sexual abuse is confusing. We have conflicted feelings. On the one hand, it's pleasurable and it's attention. On the other hand, it's an abuse of power. I can't think, sexual abuse has historically been a highly underreported crime. And I can't think of a more underreported sex crime than a woman grooming and abusing a teenage boy. So do not think, parents, for one moment, that there isn't some woman out there who wants to turn your teenage son into her play toy. Don't think of that. That's not the case for one moment. You talk to your daughters about sexual abuse, talk to your sons too. So I'm going to jump ahead to high school now. I was 6 feet, 2 inches tall. I was either 16 or 17 years old when I got called into the counselor's office late in the day. I didn't know why I had got called to the counselor's office so late, but I dutifully went. I sat and waited and waited and waited. What was taking so long, I thought? I asked the lady working at a desk sort of in the middle there. I don't remember what she said, but I do remember that she didn't give me any real answer. The counselor asked her to turn off the lights when she left. At the end of the day, the woman turned off the lights, picked up her things, and began to leave. She walked towards me into the waiting room and toward the door. She looked at me as she was walking towards me. She looked at me knowingly. maybe she felt bad. Maybe she didn't. Maybe she thought that if I was her son, she wouldn't want the counselor to have sex with me. Maybe she didn't feel she could report it. Maybe she didn't want to. Why did she turn off the lights while I'm still there? I thought. At some point thereafter, the counselor called me in somehow, or I went looking. We had a 69 on the floor of her office. She made me lick her ass that day, and I remember thinking, that wasn't that bad. I think it happened maybe a couple of additional times, but I knew how to get rid of her. I went up and put my arm around her in the quad during recess. While I had sexual feelings, in the back of my mind, I knew she would have to back away if I started to behave like that in public. So she later told me not to do that. Now, after I graduated, I went to community college. I became a lifeguard and swimming instructor. I was around 18, 19 years old. One of the mothers of one of the children I was teaching took an interest in me. She was at least in her 30s. I was a barely legal teen. We had an affair. One day, she was angry with her husband, and she was angry because he gave her a dildo for her birthday or some holiday or something. And I didn't know what to make of that gift. All I knew was that he had provided her with this great house with a swimming pool. He was a business owner. When I think back on it now, he was probably saying, Eustace, stop cheating on me. He probably didn't know how young the men were she was cheating on him with. Now, I knew how to get rid of her too. I started to tell her I loved her. I really didn't, but I knew that she could not have that. And she, of course, immediately dropped me. Now, this story would not be complete without a story of redemption. I had a conversion experience in a women's studies class at the University of Southern California. And I've told this story before, and you can see the show in God Called a Writer, Paul's Mystical Conversion Experience on my podcast. And I put a link to that already in the chat when I put those other links in there, so you can access that for that story. But the experience of the spiritual experience had a profound effect on me. I became a founding member of the Students Alliance for a Non-Sexist Society. I founded a pro-feminist anti-pornography group called People Against Pornography. I wrote and spoke about pornography and eventually authored an academic survey, here it is right here, of laws and social attitudes towards sexually explicit materials around the world, entitled Social Issues in Global Perspective, Pornography, published by Lexington Books. So men are lonely, they're killing themselves at much higher rates than women, and suicide rates are rising. They're killing themselves with drugs and alcohol and turning to authoritarianism. So how do we help men? Well, what I want to do is show you some data. So let me go ahead and share my screen here.
I have one idea, Richard.
Well, yeah, yes, Jeffrey.
You know that show 2020
Uh-huh.
on ABC?
Not really, but
Well, to look it up, you should share your story on there. See if it'll help out in this kind of a thing.
Thank you. So what I want to know, can you see the graph on the screen? And are there any blocks or things in the way? Are you seeing the graph clearly? Jeffrey?
It is clear, Rich.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much, Sam. All right. So here are the deaths of despair, and suicide, alcohol-related deaths, drugs, and the deaths of despair are sort of an aggregate of all of those things. And you see the tremendous rise in these deaths of despair over the last, since around maybe 2000, it looks like here. So now
I could have been one of them.
Yeah, okay, Jeffrey, let me do the presentation, okay, Jeffrey?
Okay,
All right.
I'd like to share my story too, if you don't mind.
Well, when we get to the question and answer parts, we can do that, okay?
All right.
So these are the suicide rates. And as we see here, white men are at the top. And you really wouldn't think that if white men are powerful and white men are the oppressors and white men, why are they killing themselves at such higher rates? And then you see all men, the rate of suicide is increasing for all men, although white men are twice as likely to commit suicide than men of color. And then here we see, interestingly, white women going down and women of color pretty much the same. So let's go to the next one here. So here we have non-Hispanic white men, 45 to 50 or 54. This is from the CDC. And we see that drug deaths are going up quite significantly, and for all males, and for everyone, it looks like, but particularly for white men, and then for males. And then we also see that white women are also increasing at pretty much the same rate as white males. And this has caused some people to speculate that these deaths of despair are a white issue. And I'm sure that there are issues that race may play a role in it, particularly with some of the negative narratives that are negative towards men, towards America, towards Christianity, towards Western civilization, toward Christianity, may be having an impact, and then maybe the threat of loss, of losing their position, is leading to these deaths of despair. But on this presentation, I'm really going to focus on men, and not necessarily just white men, but men in particular. And then here we have a graph of suicide rates, and we can see that from here that we haven't had this level of suicide since the era of the Great Depression. And it's pretty much the same with men all around. The suicides have crept up into post-Depression era levels. And here we see white women have increased, but female suicide has remained largely the same. And a lot of women, maybe more women, attempt suicide, and men are just simply more successful at it. And on the other hand, we don't know how much of the suicide attempts that women are involved in are superficial, are seeking attention. But there you have it. So why is this happening? What's causing these deaths of despair, particularly among men and among white men in particular? And so what I want to do now is I want to share a video with you. So
I'm Dr. Orion Taraban, and this is Psych Hacks, Better Living Through Psychology. And the topic of today's short talk is women are making society polygamous. Now, this is obviously a very provocative title, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it is true. And I hope to back it up with some evidence and arguments in this episode. I will say at the outset that I don't think this movement is intentional. That is, I don't think that women are consciously attempting to accomplish this purpose. This is an epiphenomenon that emerges out of the data en masse, kind of like how a wave emerges out of the movements of individual particles, none of which are particularly wave-like. None of the molecules has any awareness that it is contributing to the wave, but the wave arises out of the molecules nonetheless. This is the mystery surrounding individuals and populations. The two are obviously connected, but it's impossible to see how unless you take a wide enough vantage.
What happened there? Sorry about that.
individuals and populations. The two are obviously connected, but it's impossible to see how unless you take a wide enough vantage.
Oh, I'm gonna have to open another one. I'm sorry about that. Didn't get to all of that. Let's try it again.
Now, to understand why this is happening, why women are making society polygamous, you have to first understand that women today are absolutely crushing it. While there was a gender gap that clearly favored men 50 years ago, we now have a gender gap that clearly favors women. And in many domains, the size of this gender gap is larger than the size of the gender gap that we had a half century ago. Probably for the first time in human history, in most Western societies, childless women under 30 are earning more than childless men under 30. Women are graduating from high school, from college, from postgraduate institutions at a significantly higher rate than men. In fact, at a nearly 2-to-1 ratio. They are doing very well. So hooray, women. That said, all this success does come with an unintended consequence with respect to the dating market. And before the women complain, well, who cares about dating? Let me just say that you should care about dating, because unless you want to go back to your father choosing your husband for you, this is pretty much the only pathway to long-term relationships, marriage, and children, which are things I often hear women caring about. So problems with dating will have important downstream consequences. So what is the unintended consequence? In order to understand it, you first have to appreciate that women tend to date hypergamously. For those of you who have never heard this term before, hypergamy is the tendency to date across and up status hierarchies. To put it simply, women want a man who was at least as good as her, if not better. And better, of course, is how women choose to define it, because it's for the cat to decide which milk is good. However, with respect to some very obvious metrics, women tend to marry men who are older, taller, stronger, higher status, and higher earning. And here's the rub. If women are outperforming most men and women continue to date hypergamously, then voila, you have an increasingly shrinking pool of men that the majority of women would even consider as candidates for dating and mating. And that's bad for women, because fewer eligible men significantly increases the intra-sex competition for a dwindling pool of potential mates. And it's also bad for most men, because most men are just flat out being disqualified from the sexual marketplace. On the other hand, if you are a top 10% man, a top 5% man, wow, is it a time to be alive? And why is that? Because all of these beautiful, high-achieving, intelligent, successful women are competing for you, one of a smaller and smaller subset of men. And the men at the top of these status hierarchies are just having a lot of sex with a lot of different women, and this phenomenon is accelerating at a fantastic rate. In the last 10 years, the number of sexual partners that the average man has had has remained the same. However, over that time, according to the General Social Survey, the number of men under 30 who had no sex in the past 10 years and in the past year has tripled from 10% to nearly 30%. This means that one in three young men have absolutely zero presence in the sexual marketplace. On the other hand, only roughly 1 in 6 women in that age group reported the same thing. This creates a correspondence of roughly 5 women for every 4 men. And that assumes an even distribution across the remaining participants, which is absolutely not the case. The top performing men are not only having more sex with more women, they're having a lot more sex with a lot more women. So what does this mean? Well, if you put two and two together, it means that society is becoming increasingly polygamous, in which a smaller and smaller subset of men are enjoying a larger share of the sexual access to all women. To put that 5-to-4 ratio another way, this means that 20% of women under 30 are currently in a polygamous relationship, whether they're aware of it or not. This situation is not conscious or intentional, but the data back it up. And just to be clear, this is not something men are doing. This is not something that men are forcing on women. Why? Well, in the first place, you have to remember that more men are getting less sex than they had 10 years ago. So if this is a conspiracy on the part of men, they're doing a really bad job of it. And in the second place, women are gatekeepers of sex. These women are not having sex with a smaller subset of men against their will. It's the women who are functionally voting with their feet that it's either these men or no men at all for me, thanks. And what's the likelihood that any one of these top men who now have historically unprecedented sexual access to women, what's the likelihood that one of these top men is going to exclusively commit to any one of these women? I would say that it becomes increasingly smaller. So this is one of the unintended consequences of women's recent success. And what are the solutions? Well, we know that there are several bad or unlikely ones, including reactionary social movements that relegate women to traditional gender roles, or asking women to date and mate with men who are less desirable to them. Neither of those things is going to happen. So to be honest, the best solution that I can come up with is to really support men. Like to support men with at least as much vigor and enthusiasm as we currently support them. So that the pool of desirable men continues to grow rather than shrink for many years to come. You can be the judge of how likely that will be anytime soon.
Okay, so now what I like to do is I like to show you some of that data. So I want to go back and go back to the, so here we have the share of men who are share people 25 to 35 years old. And this is a graph of the unmarried and whether they've had sex in the last year. And we see that there's been like a 20% increase since around 2009, 2008. Yet for women, it's largely the same. And then down here, these are the married couples. And we see here that almost zero. I mean, there's a points where women are almost at zero. And then here's this increasing gap. And I don't know what to make of it. Probably, I know that men, when they're cheating, probably still have sex with their wives, while women, when they're cheating, they tend not to have sex with their husbands. And so it makes me question, who is the person who's really most likely to cheat in the relationship? And I think it's the person who has more opportunity to do so. And that person is usually the woman. And then here's a graph that sort of shows you a picture of what hypergamy looks like. And on the left, we see this is the men who would happily marry the women they would happily marry. And on the right is showing women and the men that they would be happily partnered with. And there's one thing I want to tell you, that this on the left, this red part, this tells you what men really are. This tells you what men really are. They're not toxic, they're not dogs, they're not trash, they're not useless. Men are God's gift to women. No matter how old or young, heavy or thin, beautiful or ugly, there's a man who will make love to you. Men are God's gift to women. Over for women, not so much. And what this sort of also shows, and the next slide will show, is that men have a much broader sexual palette than women do. Women have a more narrow sexual palette. For men, there's a niche for every type of woman out there. So, and here, what this reminds me of is, I tell young men in high school and so forth that the girls they're hanging out with now, when they graduate, they're going to start swinging for the fences. And that's sort of what that reminds me of. Even the least attractive women feel entitled to the most attractive men. And why not? So here what we see is, this is from OkCupid, and this is a rating of how men rate women and how women rate men. And we see that men have this bell curve here, that, and they come up with some type of range, but they come up, they find most women attractive. Women, on the other hand, look at the least attractive side. It's 50% of men are unattractive to women. If you add the 23%, that's 75% of men are on the unattractive side of the graph. And then you look at most attractive, 0%. Women have a much more discriminating sexual palette and a more objective standard. They're all looking for the same thing. Muscular, good genetic markers, muscular, good chin cut, and then finances, protection, ability, and status. So, and men have more of a subjective standard. Some men like one thing, other men like other things. It's a little more subjective for men. For men, for women, they're all looking for the same thing. It's an objective standard. And so what does this tell you when women say it's not all about looks? You know, we get this thing that, oh, men are all about looks. It's all about beauty. They never see the inside. Yeah, for men, it is about looks, but they have a wide palette. They find a lot of women to be attractive. It is about looks, but they find many women fit into their mold for what is attractive. But for women, what they say when they say it's not all about looks is that, hey, it's mostly about looks, but you can add in status, you can add in financial, the provisioning, you might add in some protection there, but it's a lot about looks for women. And so this myth that somehow men are all about looks and women are more about the less physical side of things is absolutely not the case, at least according to the data that we have. Okay, so women have had this great opportunity to be sort of sexual liberation. They are having sex with the men that they choose to have sex with. And it's not necessarily that women are necessarily more sexual, but they have much more sexual opportunity. And so they have this new liberation. The taboos have gone down. Sex for the sake of having sex is okay nowadays. Women are much more free to have sexual relationships with men, and much more sexually, they have it in a sexual revolution of sorts. So what have women chosen to do with this new sexual freedom? So this is from Tinder, and this shows the amount of men and women who like and then match with a person. And we see here, men like most women. Men are attracted to most women. But women, 95% of the men on Tinder. Now, this may be weighted more towards the sexual marketplace because it's Tinder, but some say maybe it's around 20% of men if we put the whole population in. So women are only liking and matching with 5% of the men. And then look over here, look at only 1% of the men on Tinder are getting all the action. And this is great for those men, and for the women, but it's not so great for the rest, 95% of the men. And then these men who are the 1%, they're just like other men. They have a wide sexual palette. They'll have sex with you whether you're fat, tall, skin, dumpy, beautiful, whatever. So for women, why not? These men will have sex with you too. It doesn't matter necessarily what you look like. They're men. So why not just have sex with the most sexiest, hottest men? So what this says is that really dating has become very, very difficult. This is a graph that I caught my attention because I'm older, and I'm looking at it and I'm saying this myth that somehow women are just as sexual as men. And I mean, they can be during their ovulation phases, but men are on all the time. Testosterone keys us up all the time for sex. Whereas women, it just goes along with their ovulation and their phases. And so here, what we see here, this says men or single adults who are not in a committed relationship and are not looking for one or for casual dates. 60%, 62% of women are not looking. And it's almost the opposite for men. 61% are looking. And then for me, looking at among the ages of 40 plus, women 40 plus, 71% are not looking. Now, I don't know if this means that they're not having sex. Obviously, they could be having sex. There's a lot of opportunity with strip clubs and male strippers and stuff like that. It says casual dates. I don't know if it means sex, but women retire. Some people say men are looking for love. Women are running a business. They're looking for a guy to pay the bills. And so women retire from the market. So what this tells me is that maybe men have to date younger women. I mean, we get this, but men like to date younger women. It's so disgusting. It's terrible. But maybe they have to, because that's the state of the marketplace. And then what about the young women who date older men? Where's the anger at them? What's more disgusting, an old man dating a young woman or a young woman dating an old man for status or money? So, and then the need for prostitution. If women drop out of the market and only really want to have sex with the hottest and most muscular and most masculine men, then there's a need for prostitution. But really, prostitution is such a poor substitute for true affection and companionship. And a lot of men won't be able to afford it. So they're going to be out of the market entirely. So, and it says here, nearly half of the US population of adults say that dating has gotten harder for people over the last few years. And so here, women are making bank off of men's loneliness and despair. it serves women that men live in sexual scarcity. This is OnlyFans, or what we often like to call Only Fools. And if you don't know, it's kind of like a cam girl set. But men need sexual affection. Men need that connection, and they're willing to pay to get it. They need that connection and affection and intimacy that they're not getting, and they're willing to pay big money to get it. So, and there are so many scams out there, and this is a scam, and that women are making very exploitative of men in many ways, in which you can't go on a dating site and not end up with emails from women trying to get you to go to their web page. You get hit up by women who want to move to America, or other women on Facebook or whatever, trying to make contact with you and then asking you for money, or women on even dating sites hitting you up for money, or catfishing you, or something like that. So this is let's go here. So men really need that connection. So here's the income of married men versus married women, and single women and single men. And we see married men make tons of more money. And that's the main difference between married men and single men, is the amount of money they earn. And I guess right now I'm coming to a point in the presentation where, if you really want equality, because men will always make more money than women, because that's what women demand. Women demand that men make more money than they do. So men will always strive further, take more dangerous jobs, work longer hours to make more money than women, because they're required to do that. That's what women demand of them. So if you turn a marriage market into a business where you're only marrying men who make more money than you, then you'll always work for the man. And that's just, I don't know, maybe it could pan out some way where richer and richer women are marrying richer and richer men. But if you're only going to marry men who make more money than you, you're always going to be working for the man. Now, here's another way of looking at it. This is spousal income versus a woman's own income and the age in which they got married. And it benefits women to marry young. And right now we're seeing a lot of women who are fooling around in their 20s. And then all of a sudden in the 30s, they're finding, oh, I've got to get married. I want to have children. And they're having children. There's some indication, an article came out that said 30% of women will be alone and childless by 2030. So, and there's also some that say men are leaving the dating market, but I haven't really found the numbers for that. So let's see. So, and yeah, so let's go. So, this is sexual taboo fantasies, and there's nothing more conflicted. The people are no more conflicted than they are with their sexuality. What we think we are, who we believe we are or should be, our moral values are often not in line with our sexual desires. Here in the pink are the female dominated this interest, and the blue is more, or purple is more the male. And we see again here, men all over the place, almost everything, all sorts of weird stuff. Some of it is horrible, but men have a wide sexual palette. But let's look at what women are interested in. spanking, female submitting, male dominating, heavy bondage, asphyxiation, choking, rape play, masochism, sadism, cutting and piercing. Women, there's a theme, and it's all about male domination and violence. There's something about violence and domination that is sexually stimulating for women. And there's also a lot of reliving trauma in our sexuality as well. And these things maybe have been ingrained in us from a Neolithic age. And really what we have is a Neolithic sexuality. And that's just a statement of fact, not a Neanderthal type of sexuality. But here we can see that if women really want equality, if they're opposed to male domination and they want to end male domination, maybe they should stop pining for it in the bedroom. I mean, this is so conflicted. We're so conflicted with our sexualities, but it makes sense. I don't know if it's possible. I know a lot of the people, the evolutionary psychologists, don't think women are capable of change, but there was a time when people used to take their families as entertainment to watch someone be drawn and quartered, which I think means being torn apart by the horse, to watch someone being tortured. We have been able to increase our sensibilities. And even just not long ago, there are things on TV and programs that we couldn't say today that we would find offensive. And the further back you go, the more you find that. So there can be an increase in our sensibilities. And also there can be
I'm an alpha male. I'm an alpha male, bitch. On God, I'm an alpha male. Sorry,
so
bro. I got Tourette's, bro. Yo, is that news? You're in the news place. Yo, hey, yo, bro's got gray hair. Hey, yo, bro's stressing. Yo, what the fuck? Yo, bro's stressing. Yo, why you got so much gray hair for, bitch? Yo, hey, yo, bitch. You stressing too much, bro? Don't stress.
all right.
What the heck was that?
There was we're being what is it called?
Being bombed.
Yeah, being bombed. So let me try and get back to this because I'm almost
Oh.
done with this. So,
Oh,
so where does that go? All right. So hybristophilia. And attraction.
oh my God.
Hey, just stop, Jeffrey, okay?
Sorry, I just seen two figures I recognize.
Okay, good. So an attraction to extremely violent criminals or a person who has committed a gruesome crime. Now, only women really have this fetish. Men are not writing letters to female murderesses in jail. Only women do that. As I said, there's something about violence and the potential for violence that is a turn on. And so it really makes me think, if you really think men are toxic, or you really want to oppose toxic masculinity, then maybe it's a good idea to stop being attracted, stop breeding with criminals, or stop going after bad boys, and stop, that might make a little sense. Really, masculinity is what you're attracted to. It's not toxic. But if there is toxicity, and I'm thinking about this, there's a toxicity between, is it femininity that's toxic or masculinity that's more toxic? And given my experience and the data, I think there's enough toxicity to go around. So, so basically I want to show you another video here, and then we'll go ahead and go to our discussion portion of the presentation. So let me get that here. Okay, oops, let me go back and do that. Okay. This is not it either, so. Let me go back. Sorry, it's taking me a little while to figure this out. Okay.
Today is an awesome video. I came across some amazing data that tracks changes in sexual attitudes and sexual behavior over decades. This is a real treasure. This kind of data is extremely difficult to find. Anything that tracks trends over decades with any kind of consistency is very rare. Like, look at this graph. This goes all the way back to 1937, and that is amazing to actually have data tracked for over 80 years. What you're seeing here is the percentage of men and women who were in love with their first sexual partner. Men are in the green and women are in the orange. As you can see, men are pretty consistent. It doesn't really change much. It just sort of hovers around 50% through all the decades. Women, on the other hand, have changed a lot. You can see that there's been this steady decrease and fewer women have been
Can't see the video.
and they lost their virginity. Back in the late 30s, over 80% of women were in love with their first sexual partner. But by the time you get to 2014, that number had halved to 40%. That is significant because this may be the first time, perhaps in all of human history, that women are now less likely to be in love with a man that they lose their virginity to than men. But of course, they're going to continue with this mainstream myth that when it comes to relationships and sex, men are these disgusting hound dogs and women are these perfect angels and women are these hopeless romantics, and they'll keep pushing this line despite, the existence of that irritating thing we call actual data. Now, I'm going to show you a whole bunch of graphs in this video, and they all tell a very similar story, which is one of increasing moral degeneracy when it comes to female sexual behavior as the result of cultural changes. So if you like it when women are feminine and modest and they inspire men to be better versions of themselves by leading through example, you're probably going to find this video pretty depressing. But on the other hand, if you like data and you like graphs, you're going to love this video, so stick around. Okay, so continuing with this theme of women sleeping with men that they're not in love with, have a look at this graph. All of the lines that you can see plotted here indicate the year that's being sampled. So you can see the black line goes to 1971, and this green line here refers to 2015. As you can see, in younger women, there has been a massive change. Like just a few decades earlier, only 30% of young women would say that they would be willing to have sex without being in love. That's not that long ago.
We
That's
can't
just
see the video.
two. But now 80% of women say that they don't care if they're in love with the person that they're having sex with. And it's only a tiny minority that look for that prerequisite of love. You can actually plot this trend. You can see that every single year, love gets less and less important when it comes to sex. And there's every indication that that trend is going to continue in the future. Now, you might think that this just indicates changes in sexual attitudes across the whole culture. We're destigmatizing sex, there's less shame, going through this sexual revolution. But if that was true, then it would apply culture-wide, equally to men and women. But if we look at the data, we see that that is clearly not the case. Have a look at these two graphs. What you're seeing here is the percentage of men and women who have had at least 2 sexual partners in the last year. When I'm looking at this data, I always find it most interesting to look at the youngest demographics, the 18 to 24-year-olds, because as the youth of the culture they are the best barometer for measuring actual changes in attitudes. So if society starts to shift in their priorities and their beliefs, then those changes are going to ripple through the younger people first. Now you can see that for women, the number hovers around 35%, and that's pretty consistent. It's been that way for a number of decades. So you think, all right, well, that's not really interesting. It hasn't changed, it just stays the same. So it doesn't really indicate any shift in societal attitudes, except that it does when you realize that for men, there has been a massive shift. And then you start to ask, well, why hasn't there been a corresponding change when it comes to the data for women? So you see here, decades earlier, for men, the number was similar to women's, it hovered around 40%. But now in 2015, it has halved and is less than 20% for men. That is an incredible statistic. It means that young women are twice as likely as young men to have had 2 sexual partners in the last year. Twice as likely. That is a huge discrepancy, and it reflects women's increased freedom to be able to indulge their hypergamy. At first glance, you'd think, well, this doesn't make sense. Why wouldn't the numbers be equal? For every woman that needs to have sex, there should be a corresponding man, so the numbers should be the same. But what you're seeing here is the societal trend for sexual access to be concentrated in the hands of fewer and fewer men. As women feel empowered to indulge their hypergamy, they only want to sleep with the top men, which means that those really high status individuals, those men who sit at the top of the pyramid, are having lots and lots of sex with lots of women, but the average guy is increasingly left out. This is a worrying trend because if it continues, it could lead to civil unrest, because these men are not going to feel invested in society, they're not going to feel invested in their community, and that's going to lead to an increase in antisocial behavior. Now, there are a few other explanations as to why young men are having fewer partners, whereas women are not. One cause is that young women are more likely to be shacking up with older men. Again, this is driven by hypergamy. Women are seeking those top status men, and she might only be 22 years old, but why would she want to be with a 22-year-old boy who hasn't achieved anything yet when the men in their 30s who are, high status and high wealth, they're showing her interest? Like I've said in my other videos, when it comes to dating, being in your late teens and early 20s is one of the roughest periods of men, because all of the women of your age group that you're interested in are also the women that every other man of all the other age groups are interested in. And so the competition is fierce, and because you haven't really achieved much in your life, you're sort of at the bottom of the pyramid. Another explanation that is very rarely spoken about is that women are looking at other women as viable sexual options and just leaving men out of the equation altogether. Look at these 2 graphs. In this top one, you're looking at women who admit that their sexual attraction goes beyond just men. It used to be quite low, hovering at around 10% a few decades earlier. But if you see the figures for 2015, for young women, it has jumped up to 40%. That is a huge percentage of women who are explicitly bisexual, and there's every indication that that trend is going to continue. This bottom graph shows a similar trend. Back in 1992, only 5% of these young women had had a sexual experience with another woman. But come to 2015,
we still can't see the video.
if you're an
Okay.
average guy in your early 20s and you want to have sex,
Let me stop it then. Thank you. Let me try and share it again. Okay. Can you see it now?
Yes.
to the woman. It has
Yeah.
never been harder. Competition has never been more intense. We are supposedly living in the age of sexual liberation, but for young men, it would be more accurately called the age of sexual frustration. Like, look at these 2 graphs. You can see here that in 2015, the median number of sexual partners for women aged 18 to 24 was 5. But when you look at this graph for men, you see that their number of median partners is 2.5. This isn't some outlier or anecdotal evidence. This is data taken from an entire population of people, and it shows that young women have had twice as many sexual partners as young men. Like I said, it's the age of sexual liberation for women and the age of sexual frustration for men. So let's look at some other ways that women are becoming more sexually liberated. There's this graph which shows the average age that men and women were when they lost their virginity. The female line is orange, and you can see this continuous downward trend where the age in which women were losing their virginity just gets lower and lower and lower. By 2009, it had gotten to 16.5 as the average age for women. And that is 11 years ago. there was every indication that the trend was going to continue. So who knows how low it is now? I think we need to ask ourselves, is this a good thing? Is this actually empowering for women to be losing their virginity at earlier and earlier ages? And remember, if age 16 is the average, that means that there are many women who lose their virginity much earlier. Like for every girl who loses her virginity at age 19, there is another girl who loses her virginity at age 13. I don't know, I might be alone here, but I think that this trend is worrying. This is another interesting graph. This shows changes in attitudes for what sexual acts women feel are perverse. The green lines are their opinions in 2007, and the orange lines are their opinions in 2015. As you can see, everything across the board is less stigmatized now than it was 8 years ago. Sadomasochism down from 75% to 58%. Group sex down from 64% to 49%. Porn from 25% to 16%. Just look at that entire trend, how much stigma has decreased in a short period, just 8 years. And I don't think I'm being a sexual prude here, but I have to imagine that it's not fantastic news for all the fathers out there that their daughters are now growing up in a society where there's less stigma around anal sex and swinging.
Okay, so, before we go into the question and answer, if you want to ask a question, please go to the participants menu, and then I think it's in the participants menu, or is it in the reactions menu? It's in the reactions menu, and hit the raise hand button. And that's the only way I can take questions. I won't be able to read the chat or anything like that. But I want to say this, that feminism has made men into better people. We no longer hackle or yell at women. We allow them to be our bosses, to judge us. We treat them with more respect. And we have had to grapple with our sexuality, with our tendencies through in a way that women have not. Feminism has been very helpful to women. Women have gained more freedom. They can pursue a career. They get out of these abusive relationships. Feminism has been very beneficial for women. But as far as sexuality goes, things haven't changed from in their desires at all. And so men are still faced with having to make more money, having to be dominant, but having to, the same responsibilities, the same criteria are being used to select men that were used in the 1950s. The only thing women have become now is more entitled to the only the best men to have sex with, exploitative. They're making bank off of men's loneliness and despair. You can't turn around without some scam, or you have to be careful about what some woman actually wants out of you. When you try and enter into a relationship, you go on these dating sites and you run into people who want to catfish you and try and ask you for money and scam you in some way, and abusive. I mean, in the sense that, well, they're pretty abusive when you go out on dates sometimes, and they're abusive their newfound power, their newfound freedoms. So there's a lot of people are banking. This guy we listened to at first, and the evolutionary psychology of banking, that women can't change. But I think there is some things that can change. Some of the more recent developments, maybe there could be changes, or we can at least raise our sensibility, do some consciousness raising to make people more aware of what's going on. And that way, and maybe we can get to a point where certain things, like saying that women don't need a man anymore because they make their own money, such a ridiculous and horrible thing to say. What really, women don't need men's money anymore, but that's not what's being said. Our attacks on men as being the perpetrators of much of the sexual immorality in the world. So there's a lot of things that we can do, and there can be some change. How much? I don't know. Are women incentivized to change? Maybe not. But I think that we can make some changes, and we can certainly try to help men, and that's what I've been trying to do. So I want to take some questions. So Jeffrey, why don't you, if you want, turn on your camera, and then go ahead and tell us your story here.
Thank you. I know since high school that people tease me about my feelings, saying I'd like to be a girlfriend, and then next thing, they just say, "Gotcha," you know, that kind of. I don't like being teased like that, especially when they play with my feelings. And yes, I was almost catfished one time through Instagram, but luckily they told me. Luckily, my staff told me that if it is a catfish attempt, they said request that they post a picture of themselves with a sign. That way to know if they are real and not a catfisher. She never did it, so I just blocked her.
Oh, very
Blocked
good.
her, and I just hated the whole playing my feelings thing, being autistic and all.
Yeah.
And they just hated it. And as for those two people they were called the Columbine shooters. That just seeing them reminded me of a shooting I almost attempted.
Almost attempted?
Yes, at my college.
Yeah.
I was almost at the point. Just thinking about it just hurts me. I just almost committed a great sin.
Mhm.
I'm just really trying to make up for it.
Well,
That part.
if you didn't do it, you're a long way.
My
towards-
fear stopped me. I spit it out what I was planning to do.
Yeah.
I was lucky I didn't go to jail. I went to the hospital instead.
Okay. I'm glad. You know, one thing that this presentation and writing it has done is it's done a little healing for me, because I could now see, you know, and not, because, you know, it is extremely painful. Men live in sexual scarcity, and it's really, really hard. And, you know, there was a time when I was a Chad, and I've been luckier than a lot, you know. I'm 6 foot, I have good, decent looks, you know. I've been lucky a lot, but still, I can't compete with that 25-year-old stripper. Go ahead. Okay, Eric,
What?
thank you.
Hold on, wait. One last thing.
Uh-huh.
Will you share all that stuff that you share with us, either via the chat box or email?
I will try to figure out how to share all the slides with everybody.
After all, plus I think this might be a good story for 2020.
Yeah.
2020 on ABC News for
Right.
you to share, because I'm think this, you know.
All right.
Oh,
Thank you, Jeffrey. I
welcome.
would like to be on 2020. I think I may see if I can write an article or go out and do some speaking on this. All right.
All right.
Thank you, Jeffrey. So, all right, Eric, go ahead.
Hi, yeah, a lot of this is sort of sociological and historical, and I'm just wondering, are you, Richard, aware of anyone who's leading any movement to maybe change marriage laws away from the no fault? You know, but I'm not looking for just an automatic return to some kind of traditional backward thing. I haven't done that. I have not done that much research on it, but are you familiar with any movements to that effect, Richard?
You know, I'm not. We are doing our Red Pill men's group. At some point, we may do some advocacy for certain things like that, but right now we're not near that. You know, one thing I want to say about YJ, go into the reactions menu, and you can raise your hand there, and I'll call on you. and make sure you get up. That was YJ, right? Yeah. Okay. That monogamy, I mean, when women, you know, we often think that, you know, women were, I don't know if I said this, that women were oppressed, that they were chattel, and they were forced into these polygamous marriages because they had no other choice, and that's a part of women's oppression. And monogamy was really created to create more even access for men, so that men could have a wife and have a woman. That's what monogamy was created for. And when we look at it now, we really have to come to realize and see that polygamy, some type of polygamous relationship, is really, it's women's natural state. It's where they will naturally go. They'd rather share a high value man than be stuck with a low value loser, you know. So so that's where we're at right now. But hopefully we'll be able to look at some of these laws. I think the laws on prostitution are very unevenly enforced. And, you know, there's things that women can do that men would get arrested for and be outed to their wives. So there's laws we can do. And right now we're just at the point of consciousness raising. All right. Thank you so much, Eric, for your participation and for coming. Okay. Let me get you in here. Okay, YJ, you're up. Go ahead, unmute.
Hey, Richard. Thanks for arranging this meeting. So, I know this is focused on men, but as a trans person, I feel your arguments are also ignoring a lot of the trans movement and what the potential for that would be for fixing these problems, rather than trying to go back to what it was in the old days.
So I want to say that, and one thing I didn't mention is that I date both straight and transgendered women. So, and, you know, like I was saying, that men have a wide sexual palette. They can date, like I was saying, they can date old, fat, young, old, young, old. And I think that transgender, this is my perspective, transgender women are just another form of women. So in other words, now transgender women also pick up the same mentality that women have. They have the same mentality. And but the problem I have with the transgender community, at least, you know, I'm not on the men's transgender men, but the transgender women, is most of them, a lot of them are prostitutes. And so when I go to a club to meet transgendered women, I'm inevitably faced with a lot of prostitutes. I was lucky to find one who is not. But in this sense, for me, I know one thing is for sure, that the transgender woman I'm dating now has genuine sexual desire for me. I know that that's true. And I think it gives men, if they're able to do that, more options. You know, we don't have to stick with a woman who's going to take advantage of you, rip you off, and then leave you when you're down on your luck, or when you're sick, or when she's through with you, or when you're not needed anymore. And their sexuality is not going to turn off, you know, for a lot of transgendered women. They're going to, especially ones who don't have a complete sexual transition, who, in other words, who keep their penises, their sexual appetite is going to be strong. So there's a lot of benefits to dating transgendered women, but what I see is that transgendered women are just another type of women that men can be attracted to. And I'm not sure how that goes for transgendered men, though. And I think it may be tougher, but they definitely have to look maybe in the lesbian market. I really don't know much about transgendered men, but that's how I feel. So the role that transgendered women can play is if they want to, if they can't, but many of them will still be hypergamous. You know, transgendered women still take on the mentality of men and can still be hypergamous. The reason that the woman I'm dating is because she's makes much less money than me. That's one thing that is for sure. I don't know, but the good thing is, you know, half the battle is to find a woman who has genuine sexual desire for you. So I don't know if that answers your question.
Well, so perhaps you misunderstood. Well, first of all, I'm sorry that your experience of trans women has been so limited. There's a very large and thriving community of trans people in Long Beach, and I hope you get to meet them one day. And they're not prostitutes; they're just normal people like me. I'm an engineer, by the way, and I'm actually non-binary. I don't consider myself a woman. And my argument was more that perhaps society needs to reduce the boundaries between men and women. Maybe there needs to be less difference between men and women rather than trying to go back as you seem to be proposing to the old days and
Well,
actually move forward.
Yeah, that's one thing I'm not proposing. I'm not proposing going back to the old days. I'm just not proposing that. I think I would like to see women change. Ideally, I'd like to see women. I don't, like I go dating with women. It's like, what do I have to do? Commit my whole freaking life to you just to have sex? I mean, what the heck? Why are they just because I'm not a top tier man, are they attracted at all? So anyway, I don't know where that. So I would actually like to see some change in a positive forward direction rather than going back. And I think a lot of the red pill groups, their politics suck, and that's one of the reasons we're doing a nonpartisan one, so that we can get the politics right. But we can see how the situation is and what the evolutionary psychologists are saying, and we can see how our sexualities, I mean, I think men have changed, but almost all of us still have a Neolithic or a Neanderthal type of sexuality, and to some extent, and certainly women have that Neanderthal era sexuality. And so, but like the guy said, going back doesn't seem to be the answer. Only going forward does. And the question is really, what can we do to help men, right, who are going through this struggle? And then also, are women capable of insight and change? Are they capable of that? And so, no, I don't want to go back to some traditional thing, although it's important to recognize why those traditional things existed in the first place, and not to just condemn them when we find out something is so different than how we thought. Does that better answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. All right. Thank you, YJ. I would definitely want to get Professor Dowd in here. All right, Joseph.
Hi, Rich. So I raised my hand because I'm just I was wondering, I would like to hear some thoughts from both you and YJ, if possible, about something that I've been thinking about. I'm definitely not at all an expert when it comes to gender issues. That's not the kind of philosophy I do. But something I've been thinking about is, I remember, Rich, you've mentioned, maybe in the Think group that I used to lead, I don't remember, but you've mentioned that at one point, maybe in the 1980s, I don't remember when, but you were involved in radical feminism, right? And as I know that radical feminist philosophy is internally diverse, and there are different viewpoints, but I know that one idea that many radical feminists had was that gender is a social construct. There's not really a difference between men's brains and women's brains. It's just that the reason little boys like toy trucks and little girls like dolls is just social conditioning. That was one idea that some radical feminists had, and thinking about the transgender community, and it made me think, it seems to me that idea that gender is purely a social construct can't possibly be right, because like the very fact that transgender people exist indicates that it can't be right. So like you and like YJ, I don't at all want to go back to, outdated gender norms. But it does seem like, and obviously there are some people who, yes, are non-binary. They don't identify with, completely with either gender. But it does seem like if you can have someone who is born, for example, into a male body, but identifies as a woman, well, then they're kind of going against the entire conditioning of society by doing that. So that seems to suggest to me that there really must be a difference between male brains and female brains, and maybe in the case of transgender people, like let's say someone who's born into a male body but identifies as a woman, maybe you've got kind of like a female brain in a male body, and so that he feels uncomfortable with she feels uncomfortable with her male body, right? And so I'm curious, Rich, where you now stand on the issue of whether gender is socially constructed, and YJ, I'd be curious to hear your take. I mean, is what I just said, does that make sense? Does that fit with your experience of people in the transgender community, that gender is not a social construct, that it's kind of like there's something in the brain, or am I off base?
Well, I think that there's definitely women and men are different, and
sorry to interrupt, but here's an old saying you can use that I'm going to share with you. If everything was the same, then this world would get boring.
Right. Thank you, Jeffrey.
So you could use that for what he said.
Thank you, Jeffrey. So, and I listened to this little thing with a lesbian talking about this gender construction, and what she asked was, isn't there something, or I guess the point is that, she said she was attracted to women, not men who think they're women. And I find, having dated both transgendered women and women, one of the problems I have is that I'm straight, I mean, when I was younger, I used to be able to switch hit, but I'm pretty much straight. There's nothing like a natural born woman's body. And it doesn't really matter how big they are or how small they are, there's something about a woman's body that is different. And so I guess that feels so good, to a man. And so is gender really constructed? Maybe sex is not constructed. Maybe gender is, but the evolutionary psychologists are saying, hey, we've had survival tools that we evolved to use, and those survival tools are also not just physical evolution, but psychological evolution, so that women are hypergamous because they had to be, you know, and men want access to unlimited amounts of women, and that was their strategy. And so all of these things are happening because that's how women had to be. I mean, they had to be able to find the highest status, strongest, tallest male. And that still, you know, you see over the grass, you know, better chance of hunting, you know, stronger, you know, able to protect, high status, able to provide. You know, women have had to find these things, and that's where this comes from. So so I don't think that gender is entirely constructed. I think that there's an evolutionary process, and that women's brains and men's brain may be different, but certainly their attitudes, their thoughts, and the way they think and the way they act are different. So we've got a little more time. I definitely want to get a woman in here. So thank you, Jeffrey. Melinda, go ahead and unmute. And
hi. Did this start at 2? I'm so angry because I got information saying that it started at 3:30.
oh, I'm so sorry about that.
Yeah.
Oh, it starts at 2. There was one thing out there that said it started at noon, but I had to change that. So I mean,
because I saw something else, but anyway, I never seem to get the right time on these things. But
it will be recorded for you.
Yeah, one thing that I'd like to say is that what you guys are talking about right now is after colonization. You know what I mean? It was a very white male way of looking at things. If you take examples from indigenous people, you know, there was no hierarchy. You know, women did this, men did that. The contribution was just the same, was valued just as much, you know, so there was no hierarchy, and all were appreciated, right? In our society, one of the worst things I think women did to ourselves was during women's liberation, when we wanted jobs, we said, you know, please let me work. I'll still do everything at home. Please let me work. And that lasted until now, you know. I worked at a job that was extremely taxing and difficult to do. And I would see my colleagues sit down and go, oh God, what am I going to make for dinner tonight? You know, and for large part, men just come home and rest, you know. And I think that started because we were begging for the ability to work outside the home. So we said, we'll do everything, you know. The other thing that I was thinking about in regard to gender, I actually learned a really good lesson from my daughter, who's 21 now. And I was confused, you know, she has transgender friends and, you know, just all types of friends that identify all different ways. And to me, it was like, oh my God, you know, what is this? And I was asking her questions. It was her and I was like, look, just, you know, fill me in on this. How does this work? What does this do? You know, what do they do together? You know, what's going on? And she looked at me and she said, it's none of my business. And I think that was the most profound thing. It like a light went off in my head and it was like, oh, I get it. It's not my business. It's not my business how somebody identifies themselves or what they do in the bedroom. You know what I mean? It's just not my business. They need to be able to live in a world as they are. And I me too. You know, I don't want people deciding for me.
Yeah.
what
So,
to do.
yeah, so Melinda, when did you come in? When did you get to the presentation? Near the very end? You haven't seen
Yes,
the,
yes.
yeah, so you haven't seen the whole presentation. Well,
Yes.
the
So if
one thing-
I'm saying something that was brought up, I apologize.
right, well, it's things that, you know, some things we didn't talk about though that you brought up, which is this chore play type of thing. And you know, well, one thing that I tell people is that, you know, women do things to make their men less attractive. And the problem with all these chores things is that none of them are sexy. You know, I told a woman at the last meeting, you might as well be having sex with a male stripper in the bedroom while your husband's washing dishes. That's how much sexual energy you'll have for him after he's done the dishes. And is it really the fact that men don't do the dishes or don't do the cleaning? Is that really what is making women leave them? I mean, is that really it? Is that really what, you know, it, and I don't have a problem with trying to help. I think we have been grown up differently. I think women clean much more efficiently than men do. Some men don't even really know how to do it well. But at the same time, men are making more money than women. They're coming home, they're bringing home the bacon, you know, and some people say women should be a complement to your life, not the focus. And so when a woman does these chores, it's because she really likes you, you know? And so, well, maybe men,
I really don't think that's the key. You
right,
know,
but the
I
thing
think
is,
women are expected to do
well,
the
but
house. And I don't think that men, you know, men making more money is kind of set in the system.
no,
You know,
it's set because women demand it. That's part of the presentation that you missed. Women demand that men make more money than them. That's the
women
only way-
demand that men make more money than them.
Yes, yes, you're going to have to go and watch the whole presentation afterwards.
I'm going to have to.
Yeah, because they only will date men who make more money than them. So men are always going to make more money than women because they have to, because to get the affections of a woman, they need to make more money because that's a criteria for dating. Go back and watch that.
Okay, I
but-
might be outside the norm, you know, but like I could care less about cars. I could care less about looks, you know. People don't become attractive to me until I've talked to them and I got to know them, you know. I don't need, you know, I was making the last job I had, I was making $36 an hour,
Right.
you know.
So I think we need to, I mean, really, we're going back over the whole presentation. And,
Okay, I'm sorry.
and we're over time already. But you know, one of the things that the evolutionary psychiatrists and the red pill people say is that it's behavioralism. Watch what women do, not what they say. And that's what the statistics and data we have. Whatever women say maybe is one thing, but what they do is something different. So so while you may say these things, when we look at the data, we see something different. But
that sounds an awful lot like, you know, when she's saying no, but she means yes.
No, that's not what it is. It's when she's saying she has these priorities, she means something else. She means, yes, you know, looks are not everything. But really, when we look at the data, looks are huge for women.
What kind of data? Like interviews?
Well,
with
you're
people?
gonna have to watch the video because we just
That's highly suspect to me.
well,
because I don't like the idea
that's
that it's-
because we've been fed this information, right? And if you since you weren't here for the presentation, you
Yeah,
really
I'm sorry, I
haven't
shouldn't take up so much time, but
yeah,
yeah.
you need
if
to
I had
watch.
the right time, I would have been here.
Yeah. So yeah, so you need to watch the
But
presentation.
then I can't discuss it with anybody.
Right, right. Now that would be good, but we will end up going through the whole thing. And there's been plenty of people here who have seen it, who had opportunities to ask questions about it, and some who did, and some who didn't. So, yeah. So in any case, I want to thank everybody for coming. Thank you for participating, Melinda. I want to thank everybody for coming. Remember, our next upcoming events, the Red Pill Men's Group, register for that at tinyurl.com, Red Pill Men, and then also our January 6th planning meeting for our January 6th event, and that's at tinyurl.com, Jan 6, 2024. And then also go to our YouTube page, subscribe, like, and subscribe, the Truth and Democracy Coalition. youtube.com/@Truth and Democracy Coalition. So thank you, everybody.
Hey,
for
hey,
coming.
wait, before we close out, two things I need to ask you real quick.
Yeah, go ahead, Jeffrey.
For one, about the January 6th event, we should also discuss about what should we name that day as a annual event like 9/11 is called 9/11 I call it 9/11 Remembrance Day. Well, it's not officially called that, but I like to call it that.
Okay.
But you know that.
Thank
Like
you,
that.
Jeffrey.
And secondly, will you share the stuff that you share with us right now, or via?
I'm gonna try
via
to do that via the email.
Okay.
I'm gonna try to do that. I'm gonna figure out how to do that.